So I'm Llio. I'm originally from Talabont, which is a small village just north of Aberystwyth, but I'm now based in Cardiff and been living here for the past year. And I'm a hand weaver and a textile designer. So I design and weave bespoke cloth for interior purposes, so blankets and cushions, and I've also done a small range of accessories. I also work with a mill where I design and weave samples here, and then I take those to the mill and then they can weave the fabric for me. So, and that, once again, that's produced for blankets and cushions. I originally started being very creative in school, and then wanted to pursue kind of a career in the arts. So went to do an art foundation course, and then studied in Manchester, and I studied textiles, and that's where I was introduced to weaving, the process, and automatically I fell in love with the making of the cloth, not necessarily adding anything to it like you would a print, but starting with thread, with yarn, and following certain processes, and then you create your own bespoke cloth, and I just loved that process of making and using my hands to create fabric. So I knew straight away that's what I wanted to kind of do. Worked in a number of places. I went over to New York, came back here to work in Swansea, went to Bath to do my masters, and once again I think that's where I just got the chance to hone in on that craft really of hand weaving. Since then went up to Scotland and worked for a mill designing tartan. Since then I've come back here and have started my own business, with the essence really of creating a contemporary Welsh cloth. I take my inspiration from the world around us really. I try and keep my eyes wide open, so even walking down the street I look at the tiles on the floor or the windows around us. Being raised in West Wales, the landscape and the seascape has been a big part of inspiration. I looked at maritime signalling flags, trying to use the shapes, quite the geometric shapes that we see in maritime signalling flags, and then trying to take those then to kind of create contemporary designs. My way of sketching, if you like, is creating these kind of paper designs. I look at the world around us. I take a lot of inspiration from traditional Welsh textiles. I've gathered a collection here of people's blankets, and then from the patterns that I can see in the traditional Welsh blankets, I create these paper designs, if you like, and it's a way for me, it's kind of a way for me to sketch ideas, look at colour proportions. I do these literally as design ideas, but it was quite funny when I did them on my master's course. I think someone said, oh. From that I also create these yarn wraps, and once again it's looking at how the colours sit next to each other, how a stripe would fit in a blanket. From that you need to plan out what you're going to weave, so you're looking at creating a warp. So it's a matter of winding a warp, and that can be the length of your fabric, so it can be 2 meters or it can be 80 meters upwards. We've got these yarns here. This is our warp. So the weaving process before you get onto the loom, you've got to wind the warp onto the back beam of the loom, and then all these individual yarn threads have to be threaded through into these heddles here. And these heddles are attached to the shafts. The process of designing and threading up the loom, it's quite a long process, and it can take, depending on what you want to weave, but it can take days. I've got 2 looms with me here in the studio, a sampling one where I might put a warp on in a day and get a few samples in a day, where I've got a larger loom as well, which is much wider, and it can take me up to a week to set that up. For this project, the Objects of Comfort, I, as a hand weaver, want to create product for people to use. And I think a blanket is definitely something that can bring you comfort. I'm extremely interested in that aspect of how a design can spark kind of nostalgia in people. Maybe you had a blanket when you were kind of growing up, and you know, when you see that design or even colourway, it can, you know, take you back to that specific place. So I'm very interested in how to recreate that in a contemporary way. So for this project, I put a call out on social media for people to send images of their blankets, and I was inundated really with a number of different designs and so many different colourways, and it was quite nice because a number of kind of stories came with these blankets of where they were, where people bought them, or even who passed them on to them. So it was really lovely to hear those stories and to think how I'm able to take these designs but make a new blanket for today's age, you know, a contemporary blanket. I've hand woven a blanket for this project that hopefully looks at the specific shapes that we see in traditional Welsh blankets, but have created a blanket for today. One thing that's quite significant about the Welsh traditional blanket is that it's a double cloth blanket, so there are 2 layers in one blanket. And that's a technique that I've adapted to create this blanket, and that creates obviously a very warm blanket, but also it allows me to create or, you know, to have 2 different designs happening in one piece. And that's quite a traditional element that we would see in Welsh blanket. So that's another element that I wanted to introduce to this contemporary blanket, but also a nod to a technique that we'd see in a traditional blanket. What I really want this blanket to bring is that sense of warmth, literally, because it's a nice woolen blanket, but also to bring that warmth through the designs that are in it, because it will spark nostalgia and hopefully spark warmth to the people that use it.